Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, we're on Daf Chof Aleph Aleph in Masech Shabbos. What we learned last week was the perek is Bameh Madlikin Uvameh Ein Madlikin. What oils, what wicks can you use on Shabbos? What oils and wicks can't you use on Shabbos? And bottom line, the question became for Shabbos, the flame may flicker because of the wick, the flame may flicker because of the oil, and then when it flickers, you may forget it Shabbos and adjust the wick or the oil. If it turns out the fire gets better, that's hav'ora. If it turns out that while you're playing around with the wick and the oil, it burns out, that is kibui. Either way, it's a malacha d'oraisa. So Chazal said the following oils, the following wicks should not be used on Shabbos. To which Rami Bar Chama said that whatever wicks and whatever oil can't be used on Shabbos cannot be used in the Beis Hamikdash menorah in the Heichel, not the menorah at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Why can't you use those wicks and those oils in the menorah that's lit every afternoon in the Heichel? There's no problem. If it flickers, you can adjust it, because the pasuk says lahalois ner tamid. When you light the menorah in the heichel, it should go up. Lahalois ner tamid. The flame should go up, and you shouldn't have to adjust it after that. Okay, Rabbi Kiva Kasha. Why did Rabbi Bar Chama say all the oils you can't use on Shabbos, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash? There are plenty of oils you can use on Shabbos, but you still can't use in the Beis Hamikdash because you can only use Shem and Zayasah. Rabbi Kiva doesn't answer that question. So what we're left with is what you can't use on Shabbos, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara asked on Rabbi Bar Chama twice from places where it says you can use the gartels of a kohen, a gartel of a kohen, or the big day kahuna of a kohen that wore out. They used to tear them and make wicks, and they used to use them in the Beis Hamikdash. So the first source that the Gemara has for this is in Sugya, and they use these wicks for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So l'cha'ora, it would seem that that's a contradiction to Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama said what you can't use on Shabbos, you can't use in the Beis Hamikdash. Wool is one of the things you can't make a wick out of on Shabbos, so therefore you shouldn't be allowed to use it in the Beis Hamikdash, but it says that they use the gartel to make wicks. So Gemara said that's not a problem because that's talking about Simchas Beis HaShoeva. It's not a biblical requirement. The biblical requirement of Lahalis Ner Tamid from the pasuk is only the menorah in the Heichel that was lit every afternoon. The menorah for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva was just to give light during the singing and the dancing. For the Simchas Beis HaShoeva wasn't a biblical requirement, and therefore they were able to use the gartel. The Gemara then brought a second second quote that said that they used the big day Kohen when they wore out, they ripped them up and they made wicks. And there it's talking about the menorah in the Heichel. So the Gemara said, yes, it's talking about the menorah in the Heichel, but that's only talking about the big day Kohen that didn't have wool in it. The Kohen's, for example, pants. But you couldn't use the Kohen's gartel for the menorah in the Heichel because that gartel had wool in it, and you can't use wool for a wick on Shabbos. Therefore, you can't use wool as a wick in the menorah in the Heichel. And that's the sugya we had. So now let's take a look at Tosfos. This is a Tosfos that is in honor of Yosef Simons. Yosef had a question about whether a person can derive benefit from looking at a picture. Now, the question can go even further back. Can a person look at the Harabayas and see the beauty of the Harabayas and enjoy looking at the Harabayas? Is there any isim ilah, misuse of hektish? If a person takes an animal that's hektish and plows his field with that animal, he's over on me'ilah. Can a person enjoy looking at the Beis Hamikdash, looking at the Harabayas? Yosef's question was, if he has pictures of the Harabayas, can he sell it to people or is that a me'ila? So let's take a look at what Tosfos says here. Simchas daf chaf aleph amud aleph and Shabbos, Simchas beis hashoeva shiny. The Gemara said that when they tore up the gartel and they made it into wicks, or they tore up the pants and made it into wicks, that's talking about the Simchas beis hashoeva. And there, we don't care if it's wool, if it's not wool, because it's not a biblical menorah lighting. It's to keep the light on so people can see singing and dancing, Chol Hamoed Sukkos. Okay, so that's permissible. Fine. Now, Tosfos is going to a different sugya. Tema, Tosfos says, Heichi shori lahadlik. How can you possibly use worn-out clothing of a kohen to light the menorah? It's not a tzoyrech korban. What is the Big Day Kahuna there for? The Big Day Kahuna are there for a Kohen to put them on to do the avod in the Beis Hamikdash. If a Kohen Hegyid is wearing only 3 of his 4 articles, his avoda is puzzle. If a Kohen Hegyid puts on 5 garments, he takes one of the Big Day Kohen Gadol, his avoda is puzzle. A Kohen Gadol, instead of wearing his 8 begodim, he wears 7 when he does the avoda. The avoda is possible. The purpose of the Big Day Kahuna is so that a Kohen should have the proper quote-unquote attire on to be able to do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, to be able to bring a korban. That's the rule. The Omar, the Perek Beis the Kedushin. And the Gemara tells us in the second paragraph of Kedushin, the Big Day Kahuna Shabalu Ma'alim Bahem. Big Day Kahuna that wore out, there's a Din Me'ilah. After the Big Day Kahuna wore out, you can't wear them to a party. They must basically go to Geniza. So, what do we have here? We're saying the worn out clothing of a kohen, rip them up, make wicks, use them at the Simchas beis hashoeva. For what? To light up the Ezras Noshim so you can dance? What does that have to do with a korban? If it's not for purposes of a korban, you're misusing the Big Day Kahuna. Even if they've worn out, they're still holy, and you violate Me'ilah. So how can the Gemara say that the worn out begodim they ripped up and they made wicks for the Simchas beis hashoeva? So Tosfos says, v'doichik loima, and it's a doichik to say, leiv bezdin masna aleim. As we learned last week in Shkolim that there are 7 things that Bezdin did in the Beis Hamikdash. We're going to learn a bit more about it today in Shkolim. Bezdin has the ability to make certain conditions and certain rules on how the money in the Beis Hamikdash is spent. They can say, we'll spend it for this and we'll spend it for that. They have the power to make conditions on how the money is spent. So maybe Tosfos says, maybe Tosfos says that when the Big Day Kohen were bought, Bezdin made a t'nai and said, so long as the Kohen can wear the begodim their hektish, and when they get worn out, they lose their kedusha, and you can do whatever you want with them. Bezdin has that power. Bezdin has the power to say only while they're usable are they hektish, and once they ruin, they're not hektish. Maybe that's what happened here. So Tosfos says it's a doichik. That is really a difficult answer to suggest because we do not really have any Gemara or any Mishnah that says that Bezdin did this. So it's difficult, Tosfos says, for us to make up and say, well, it means that Bezdin did it. We don't have any source for such an important takana that Bezdin said people can use the Big Day Kohen after they wore out as wicks. We don't have a source for this, and we're not going to make it up. We don't even have, besides not having a source that Bezdin did this, what would be the logic for Bezdin to do this? The Big Day Kohen that is worn out, instead of putting it into Geniza, let's rip it up and dance a kazatzka to it at the Simchas Beis Sha'eva. There's no need for it. There's no lack of wicks in the Beis Hamikdash. There's no lack of wicks in Yerushalayim. When something is, there's an issue that has to be resolved, Beis Din will say, this is how we can do it. We have, first of all, no source in Mishnah, Gemara, that says that Beis Din said, once the clothing wore out, you can do whatever you want with it. And on top of that, even if we want to create a source, we don't have a need. Why would Beis Din tell us you can rip up the clothing and make wicks? There are plenty of wicks you can get in Yerushalayim. So how did it become mutter? How did it become permissible to rip up the begodim of a kohen and to make them into wicks for the Simchas Beis Sha'eva? The only thing Big Day Kahuna can be used for are tzorech korbanos. If you need to bring a korban. Other than that, you can't use them. And dancing, giving off light for Simchas Beis Sha'eva is not a tzorech korban. Okay. So Tosa says, we went through this very quickly orally without reading the Tosfos on Thursday. Tosa says, V'nira Levi, the hoyel ulakovid hakorban hoyu oisid. The reason why they ripped up the used up garments, the worn out garments of the kohen, the reason that they ripped them up and made wicks is to give light. That light was for covered korban. They were using the kohen's clothing to create wicks, and it is needed for a korban. Dersiv, the pasuk says, "Ush'aftem mayim b'sasei." Simchas Beis Hashoeva, and that's why we have a pasuk. It says, "Ush'aftem mayim b'sasei." When you draw the water to bring to the Beis Hamikdash, to pour on the Mizbeach on Sukkos, you shall draw that water b'sason in joy. So how do you draw the water in joy? The whole night, Chol Hamoed Sukkos, they were dancing in the Beis Hamikdash. It put them in a tremendous mood of simcha. Towards the morning, they went out of the Beis Hamikdash. We learned about this in Masechta Midas and Masechta Tamid. They went out and they drew water. They then brought the water back to the Beis Hamikdash and poured it on the Mizbeach with the korban tamid shel shachar. So this water, it's a domino. They're going out of the Beis Hamikdash to draw water. Why are they drawing water to pour on the Mizbeach? Why are they pouring water on the Mizbeach? Because it's part of bringing the korban tamid on Sukkos. So this water that's going on the Mizbeach is being brought with a korban. And the pasuk says that this water should be drawn b'sasei, b'shaftamayim b'sasei. In order to draw it b'sasei, I have to sing and dance and feel good about it before I draw the water. How do I sing and dance and feel good about it before I draw the water? I make a ganze maisa in the Ezras Nashim, but nobody can see anything. So therefore, I rip up the clothing of the kohen. I make wicks. Everybody can dance happy. Now everybody's in a good mood. In the morning, they go out and they draw water happy-go-lucky. They bring the water to Beis Hamikdash and they're happy. They pour it on the Mizbeach, so now it's part of a korban, and they're pouring it on the Mizbeach. They're so happy. Why are they so happy? Because they danced and they sang to the light of the wicks of the big day kohen. So that's how Tosfos says the light, the wicks gave off a light in the Ezras Nashim, and there was no me'ilah. It was not a misuse of hekdesh, because they burnt these wicks so they can have simcha to get the water to pour on the Mizbeach, which is part of a korban, and therefore it's a korban. Okay, so this is what we call the finger, the grubber finger, right? But that's what Tosfos says. Tosfos says if you follow the dots are, we're going to rip the clothing, put them in the special menorahs in the Ezras Nashim, not the Heichel, Ezras Nashim. And we're going to make a lot of light. And Jews are going to dance and they're going to be happy. And because they're happy, they're going to go get the water. And they're going to get the water happy. And they're going to come back happy. And they're going to pour the water on the Mizbeach happy. Oh, pouring the water on the Mizbeach happy is part of the korban. So that's why you're allowed to use the big day kohen for the wicks. Okay. So Tosfos says, Tzorech korban choshev lei. Using the wicks for this purpose, for sh'after mayim b'sasei, is considered tzorech korban. You're burning the wick from the clothing of the kohen, and it's being used for a carbon. Okay, so we answered that. You can use the big day kohen that wore out to make wicks for the simchas beis hasho'eva tzorch carbon. Taisus now has another problem. V'hoda Oma Sukkah Perikei Daf Nun Gimel. The Gemara in Sukkah and Daf Nun Gimel, where it's discussing the simchas beis hasho'eva, the Gemara says, "Bayreres isha chitin la'or beis hasho'eva." There was so much light emanating from the Ezras Nashim and Chol Hamoed Sukkos at night that a woman who was living in Yerushalayim and wanted to sift, she wanted to sift the chaff from the flour. She wanted to sift. She was able to see what she's doing in her home in Yerushalayim because the magnificent light that was coming out of the Ezras Nashim lit up Yerushalayim. Now, if you take the Gemara literally, it means that a woman was in her home, Chol Hamoed Sukkos at night, and she was sifting her flour, but it's dark in her house. She didn't even have to light a candle in her house. She used the light that was coming from the simchas beis hasho'eva, and she's sifting flour. Now, that's a problem. The problem that Tosfos started with was you cannot misuse the wicks that came from the Beged Kohen because it's Me'ilah. So Tosfos' first problem was, so how did they dance in the Simchas Beis HaSho'eva? By using this light from the Kohen Gadol's clothing. Tosfos says it's a tzarech carbon because it was for the water. But now the Gemara says there was so much light, a woman sifted flour. What does that mean? It sounds like really women sifted flour in their private home by using the light that came out of the Beis HaMikdash, the Ezras Nashim. That definitely is Me'ilah. That's not a tzorech carbon. So Tosfos says, Lo shahoisa bayreres. The Gemara doesn't mean that women actually sifted flour using the light coming from the Ezras Nashim. That's not what it means. Ela shahoisa yechoila livror. The Gemara is just saying a hypothetical. The Gemara is saying, I want you to know how much light emanated from the Beis HaMikdash, the Ezras Nashim, the night of Simchas Beis HaSho'eva. You know how much light came out? That if a woman wanted to sift flour in her home, there'd be enough light coming from the Ezras Nashim that she could do it. Did they actually do it? No, they didn't do it because it would be Me'ilah. It's just that they were able to do it, but not that they did it. The Gemara is just emphasizing the amount of light, the tremendous amount of light that came out of the Ezras Nashim, that a woman could have even done this, but they didn't actually do it because you're not allowed to do it because it's me. Umiyu, that's Tosfos teretz first. Umiyu, however, the Yerushalmi Dayak Mehacha. The Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, this is Talmud Bavli, we all know. The Talmud Yerushalmi deduces from this fact, the Mishnah in Sukkah says that women sifted flour using the light that came from the Beis HaMikdash, from the Simchas Beis HaSho'eva. So our Tosfos in the Bavli says they could have done it. That's all we mean, but they didn't actually do it. The Yerushalmi says women actually sifted flour against the light of the Simchas Beis HaSho'eva, but it's Me'ilah. So Tosfos says, the Yerushalmi answers, Umiyu b'Yerushalmi dayak mehacha, the kol, umara, v'reach, ein bahem mishum Me'ilah. Yerushalmi learns out from here that kol, voice or sound, umara, and looking at something, v'reach, and smelling something, ein bahem mishum Me'ilah. This is a Yerushalmi rule. Kol mare v'reach ein bahem mishum Me'ilah. So we learned a little about this in Masechta Tamid. If someone is around the Beis HaMikdash or in Yericho, remember we said that the Mishnah said that 10 miracles happened in Yericho. One of them was they were able to smell the Ketores in Yericho. Now someone's in Yericho and he goes, delicious, what a great smell of Ketores. Is he over on Me'ilah? No. What are the people in Yericho supposed to do? Walk around with nose plugs? What are they supposed to do? So the Yerushalmi says, if someone smells the Ketairis, as an example, he goes, or he's in the Beis Hamikdash, and they're bringing a carbon, and he smells meat roasting. He goes, delicious. Is that me'ila? No, it's reach. Kol. Somebody hears the Levium singing the Shir Shel Yoim. Or, no, it's not Zenena V'Zelo Chaser is a Baba Kama rule, Yosef. That's a rule about using someone else's property. That is a nene. This is nene means nene v'lo chaser means someone did have hana, and the other person doesn't lose by it. What Yerushalmi is saying here is it's not a hana at all. If it was a hana, it would be me'ila. The Yerushalmi is saying that since these three things are intangible, you can't hold on to a smell. So if you go and you smell the ketairis, there's no me'ila on something that's intangible. Kol, you listen to the Levium singing the shir, or you hear the beautiful music that went along with the shir. Is that me'ila? Now, when the Levium sang shira, they sang it over a carbon. When the Levium played the music, they did it over a carbon. Someone listening says, the beautiful music, beautiful. Is that me'ila? Can you touch and hold on to music? You can't touch and hold on to music. It's completely inanimate. Mare, you look at the Beis Hamikdash. You look at the beautiful decorations. You look at the harabayas. You see beauty there. Is that me'ila because your eyes are enjoying what you see? How are you supposed to walk into the Beis Hamikdash? With blindfolds? What are you supposed to do? So it's something that's intangible. What you see is intangible. What you smell is intangible. What you hear is intangible. So Yerushalmi's rule is kol mara v'reach ein bahem mishum me'ila. There's no rule of me'ila. Okay. So we had two problems, and Tosfos took care of both problems. We're taking the wicks of we're taking the clothing, the worn out clothing of a kohen, and we're ripping them up and making wicks. And we're going to dance at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva from the light of those wicks. But you can only use the wicks for a tzorach. You can only use the kohen gadol's clothing for a tzorach carbon. Okay. So by Simchas Beis HaShoeva, not a problem, because by dancing they got happy. By being happy, they drew the water with simcha, shaftamayim, b'sasai, and that's considered tzorach carbon because the water went down the mizbeach. But what about the woman who sifted flour against the light of the Ezras Noshim and Sukkis? So the Bavli says, no, they really didn't do that. They didn't really do that. They could have done it. And it's all the Gemara in Sukkah means is that there was so much light in the Ezras Noshim, you could have sifted flour, but they wouldn't do it because it was Me'ila. Tosfos now quotes Yerushalmi and says, yeah, they actually did it. Women sifted flour against the light of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, but that light came from a worn out big day kohen. Why isn't that me'ila? Because it's mara. Women were using the light that came out of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva from the worn out clothing of the kohen. They were using it to see, to how to sift flour. And using something to see is not me'ila. Smelling something is not me'ila. Using your eyeballs to see something through the light that's coming from the Beis Hamikdash, not me'ila. Smell is not a me'ila. Rav Hutner here has a very interesting comment, and this comment goes about what are the hashivos of dancing. Jews like to dance. There's a Jewish way to dance, there's a non-Jewish way to dance. Unfortunately, some of the non-Jewish dances got into Judaism. There's a Jewish way to dance. What is dancing? Dancing is taking sound, and when you know how to dance, your feet and your body move in accordance with the music. Your body is moving in accordance with the music. If you don't know how to dance well, We've seen people who can't dance well, right? They're getting very excited when the music is soft, and they're getting laid back when the music is simchadik, right? You have to attune your body to what the beat is going on in the music. So Avuna says as follows: if you learn through Masechta Brachas, there are brachas that we make when you smell something. Motzoi Shabbos, we smell psamim. You have to make a bari minei psamim. Reach, even though reach has no me'ilah, and if you smell the Ketores in the Beis Hamikdash, you're not chayiv for me'ilah. But it's still it's intangible. But there's still something there that requires you to make a bracha. Bari minei psamim. Mareh. If you look at the Beis Hamikdash and you say it's beautiful, not me'ilah. Why? It's intangible what you see. Your eyes, what they see and take in, is intangible. But there are brachas hariyah. There are brachas we make on things we see. Sometimes we see, the Gemara in brachas has all kinds of cases. We see an animal that we never saw before. There's a mashana brias. We see things. Or when Rosh Chodesh Nisan comes, we see the blossoms on the tree. We make a bracha on re'iyah. So of the three things, sound, beautiful sound, smell, and sight, they're all intangible. There's no me'ilah. Two out of those three still have a bracha, because you don't make a bracha on something that's completely intangible. So while kol, mara, vereach have no me'ilah because they're intangible, we do find that mara has a bracha and that reach has a bracha. But there's no bracha to make on kol. You hear a chazan singing kol nidre beautifully. There's no bracha ta Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Oy, what a beautiful voice. So while on besamim there's no me'ilah, there is a bracha for smelling something good. While there's no me'ilah on seeing something beautiful like the Beis Hamikdash, there is a bracha when you see things. Kol is the only thing that there's no me'ilah, and there's no bracha to make on kol. There's absolutely no bracha. What does that mean? That sound is so intangible, it's purely a spiritual, it's an event that the neshama completely enjoys. It's a neshama kind of event. And therefore, it doesn't have a physical world bracha to it. Okay. Kol has no bracha, mara has a bracha, reach has a bracha, kol has no brachas. Now, what does dancing mean, my footnote says? Dancing is taking your physical body, and your body, if you know how to dance, your body is going to flow with the music. So who becomes the boss during the dance? The body or the music? The music. Your body, your physical body is going to follow the music. And the music is so intangible that you don't even make a bracha on beautiful music. It's completely a spiritual event. So the dance is an avodas Hashem. A person is subjecting his physical body to music, which is so intangible, it doesn't even have a bracha in this world that you can make on it. So dancing properly is a way that we demonstrate that my physical body is going to be subjugated to my spiritual existence. And that's a Jewish dance. That's a Jewish dance. So when we say kol mara v'reach ein bahem mishum me'ilah, that's the Yerushalmi Shita. Sound, sight, things you see and things you hear do not have me'ilah problems with them. So we have two shitas. Tosfos holds, and that's the shita really of the Bavli, that these things have me'ilah. Kol mara v'reach have me'ilah. They could have me'ilah. And when the Gemara in Sugya says that a woman was able to sift her flour, she was able to, but didn't actually do it because that would be me'ila. Yishalmi says nothing doing. The Talmud Yishalmi says kol mavrech ein b'hem mishum me'ila. And when the Gemara says that women sifted their flour on Chol Hamoed Sukkos to be able, and they were able to see this through what? They saw this through the worn out koyin begadim that became wicks. I was okay. There's no me'ila in that. Next question that Tosfos raises. Tosfos says, we spoke this out on Thursday. Tosfos continues. My parich. Now the next words in Tosfos are michnasei kahakohanim. That's a misprint. The Masoras Hashas changes the words. The Gemara never asked from the pants of the kohen. The Gemara asked from the gartel of the kohen. So the word should be mehem ne'em. My parach mehem ne'eh hakohanim. Halahoya ban pishta. Why is the Gemara even troubled with this kasha about the gartel? What's the kasha from the gartel? Rami Bar Chama, you told me that what you can't use as a wick on Shabbos, you can't use as a wick in the Beis Hamikdash. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to use wool. And the Beis Hamikdash, they used the ripped up clothing, the ripped up gartel, which had wool in it, to light the menorah. Okay, so the Gemara said simple space sharev is different. Why did the Gemara just simply say, hold on one second. The wool I told you can't use on Shabbos is a wool wick. What they did in the Beis Hamikdash was they took the gartel, they ripped it and made it into a wick. The gartel wasn't 100% wool. The gartel has, Tosfos says, it says in the pasuk, tcheles, it had the blue wool, argomon, purple, teilash shani, red material, v'sheish mazar, it had linen, and they were all intertwined together to make thread. So when the Mishnah says you can't use wool on Shabbos because 100% wool will flicker, the gartel of the kohen doesn't even present the problem. The gartel of the kohen wasn't 100% wool. Wool was one of several materials that were used in making the gartel. And not only is that not a problem, that's great, Tosfos will prove. V'toiv l'psila, it's wonderful for a wick to have a kakarach dovish madlikin boy al gavi dovish a madlikin boy. The Gemara earlier that we didn't learn, it's the Shabbos Gemara. The Gemara says if you take a good material and you wrap it around a bad material, that's wonderful. It's very good. Uva Shabbos hu da'asa shema yadlik ba'ene. The Gemara says we're always worried about bad wicks. Why are they called bad wicks? Because they'll flicker on Shabbos. But what happens if you take very wonderful wick material and you wind it around wick material that's not so good? Can you use that on Shabbos? The Gemara says, yeah, really you can use that on Shabbos 100% because it won't flicker. But Chazal told us still not to use such a combination. Why? Because if, let's say, for example, someone takes linen, winds it around wool, and use it on Shabbos, it's wonderful. It won't flicker. But the person will make a mistake and say next week he'll just use wool by itself. Last week he used linen on top of wool. And this week, by mistake, he'll just use wool, and that's a problem. So Chazal said, we don't want you to light Shabbos lich with a good material wrapped on a not good material. You can't wrap linen on wool. Okay, so on Shabbos you can't do that. But in the Beis Hamikdash we don't make gezeres. For us right now, there's no Isa Shavus in the Beis Hamikdash. Inside the Beis Hamikdash, all these gezeres to Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were worried, if I let you do this, you may come to do this. If I let you do this, you may come to do this. That's a whole sugya of Shavus. And inside the Beis Hamikdash, for us right now, learning this superficially, there's no Shavus b'mikdash. Because Kohanim are very careful, and if we tell Kohanim you can do this, they won't make a mistake and do something else, because Kohanim are very focused on their avodah. Okay, so if you take wool, if you take linen and wrap it around wool, you can't use it on Shabbos. Why? Because a Yid will forget next week and he'll use only wool. So what is that? A good thing wrapped on a bad thing. Why can't you use it outside the Beis HaMikdash? Because of a gezerah. We're scared you may forget. There's no gezerahs we're scared you may forget in the Beis HaMikdash. We're not worried about that. So if you have linen wrapped around wool and you want to use it as a wick in the Beis HaMikdash, there should be no problem at all. So what's the Gemara's question? The Kohanim's gartel had wool in it. How can you use it in the Beis HaMikdash if you couldn't use it on Shabbos? Forget about the simple spatial Ava business. The kasha is not a kasha. When we said on Shabbos you can't use wool, it means 100% wool. But if you put linen on wool, it would be okay on Shabbos except for rabbinic gezerah. In the Beis HaMikdash, there's no rabbinic gezerahs. And what was the gartel of the kohen? It was wool that had other materials wrapped around it. So there's no problem using it in the Beis HaMikdash. The kasha doesn't even stop. The Tosfos says, V'nira Levi, the kivan she'emen apishtan ela revia, batel b'shar haminim, ve'reki'ilu ein by pishtan klal. Tosfos says a rule that there were 4 different materials in the gartel of the kohen gadol. Linen was just one of them. That means each thread in the gartel was only 1/4 linen. The rest of it was wool. Therefore, the linen is batel. The usual rules of bittul. The majority overtakes the minority. So in the gartel, there's one. They took what they did is they took linen, a thread of linen, a thread of blue wool, a thread of purple, a thread of scarlet, and then they wrapped it together and it became one thread. And they did this to a lot of threads, and they took all these threads and made a gartel out of it. But if you looked at each thread, the linen was only 1/4 of the whole gartel. Therefore, the majority of the gartel was wool. So therefore, the gartel is considered wool. That's why the Gemara says, how can Rami Bar Chama say if you can't use a wick on Shabbos? You can't use it on Shabbos. You can't use it in the Beis HaMikdash. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to use wool. In the Beis HaMikdash, they use the gartel of the kohen. But the gartel of the kohen had other materials in it. The other materials were batel, and therefore it's considered as if the whole gartel was wool. So the Gemara's kasha is a good kasha. On Shabbos, you can't use wool. And the Beis HaMikdash, they did use wool for the menorah. There's something else in the gartel, but the majority of the gartel is wool. It's a good kasha. So what's the answer? Simchas Beis HaShoeva is different, but then you have Tosfos' question, but it's me'ila, it's a misuse of the big day kohen. The Tosfos says it's soirach korban because you were able to be happy and dance when you drew the water, and the water goes on the mizbech, so it's a soirach korban. But what about the woman who sifted her flour? The Tosfos says, according to the Bafli, they didn't actually sift flour to the light that came from the Beis HaMikdash. That would be me'ila. The Gemara just means that they could have. There was such great light coming from the Ezras Nashim, they could have, but they didn't actually do it. Yerushalmi says, no. Women were actually sifting flour from the light that came out of the Ezras Nashim at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva because of the rule in the Yerushalmi, Kol Mar V'Reach Ein B'hem Mishum Me'ila, sound, Levium singing, or the beautiful music, or looking at the beauty of the Beis HaMikdash and enjoying it, smelling the ketores, because these are intangible things. There's no din me'ila. That's the Tosfos. Me'etz Hashem, tomorrow, we start with the Gemara at 9:30. Tomorrow we start the actual Chanuka Sugya. We've laid the foundation for the Chanuka Sugya. There are oils and wicks that can't be used on Shabbos and can't be used in the Beis HaMikdash. On Shabbos, they can't be used in particular because they flicker. Now, is that going to be a problem on Chanuka during the week? During the week, we don't care if it flickers. If it flickers, go fix it. On Shabbos, maybe we care. If your Chanukah licht flicker, you may forget it's Shabbos, and you may go to adjust your Chanukah licht on Shabbos. So Shabbos may be a problem, the week may be a problem, may not. So that's where we're up to now. We've laid the foundation to begin the Chanukah Sugya Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow.